I guess it's progress to say that we've talked enough to at least have a second meeting, but at some point we really need to get to the details of what they're discussing. I want to make sure, at least from my vantage point, that Witkoff is very serious about uranium enrichment. He seemed to say the red line was only weaponization, which is the process by which you fashion a bomb out of highly enriched uranium that's called weapons grade. So I want to make sure that we have a lot of technical expertise into what they're talking about, because if we want to be a deal too badly, we're going to get a bad deal.
Well, we heard President Trump in the Oval Office earlier this afternoon saying that Iran has to get rid of the concept of a nuclear weapon. They cannot have a nuclear weapon, but you're suggesting it shouldn't just be about the weapon itself.
Yeah, that's right. I think if they continue to specialize in how to make weapons-grade uranium, that's a skill that you're not going to forget. It's a learned technical skill that will be with them forever. And so we'll always constantly be trying to figure out, are you burrowing into a new mountain like they've done on 2 occasions to build centrifuge halls? And what are you doing on weaponization? That's much harder to track than a huge centrifuge hall. So if any deal results, it has to have any time, any place inspections by the UN's watchdog agency, which is called the IAEA. That's absolutely a fundamental part of any agreement, to be able to check Iran and what they're up to.
Well, so what position is Iran in coming into this then, when we're considering what an agreement could look like, knowing we've had many conversations, with you included, about how it's been weakened by the weakness of its proxies in the face of ongoing fights with Israel or the U.S. striking the Houthis, what have you. Are they weakened enough that they would actually agree to something that arguably you could say Iran might not see as super favorable to its interests?
So I'm worried they're not enough adversely affected quite yet. Remember last time in the first Trump administration, there was a long period of what they call massive sanctions and max pressure. And honestly, I don't know that the Iranians felt it enough, or I think they're willing to really take some serious pain before they're going to deal in a very substantial way on the things that we care about very much. And then, of course, as we've talked about with you before, is the wild card of Israel. Israel may be much less trustworthy of an Iranian deal than Trump might be. And so what do? Do they decide to go ahead and use military action? And I think that's something that's a serious possibility this calendar year.
Well, there's also the question of U.S. military action, too. President Trump was asked by a reporter today about that. He said, if we have to do something harsh, we'll do it. Then when he was asked specifically if that could include a strike on Iranian nuclear facilities, he said, of course it does. Do you see that as actually a likely possible scenario?
I think it's possible. I think his predominant view is what he said in his inaugural, that he wants to have fewer wars, not more, and not getting in another war in the Middle East is one of his chief aims. But at the same time, he has set the theater with B-2 bombers, extra carriers, a lot of military force. I think that's more to reinforce Steve Witkoff's hand as he negotiates diplomatically. But I wouldn't rule it out, because I think if President Trump feels like if he's disrespected or Iran doesn't take this seriously, he might go for it.
I wonder if you feel that the president might be disrespected by what we saw take place in Ukraine over the weekend. Knowing, to your point on him not being a fan of wars, he very much wants to see a negotiated outcome between Russia and Ukraine. He wants the war to end. And yet on Palm Sunday, Russia strikes inside Ukraine, kills more than 30 people, even as there are these efforts towards some kind of peace deal. Does that signal to you that Putin is not taking this seriously? And what does that mean for the president?
I don't think Putin is taking it very, very seriously. I think Putin is behaving like he has the whole time. He did a deliberate attack on a civilian gathering on Palm Sunday. I think this is par for the course for him. I don't want us to bend over backwards trying to get a deal with Putin. I think it's fine that Witkoff is there trying to establish some basic rapport with Vladimir Putin. But at the end of the day, I think the president might be a little bit too saying, oh, it's everyone's fault here. I think he ought to assign more blame to where it properly resides.
Well, on the subject of blame, we heard from him in the Oval Office, and it was an echo of what he had already posted on True Social. The war between Russia and Ukraine is Biden's war, not mine. What do you make of that language? This isn't language we've heard from him before. He's noted frequently that this war did not start under his presidency, which, yes, is true. But to characterize it as Biden's war.
Yeah, I thought he was in a lot of different places in that press conference. He also
Yeah.
seemed for a second to say that it was Zelensky's fault that they were even in the war.
Yeah, he suggested Ukraine started a war with a country 20 times its size.
But then he cleared it up by saying, I blame all three of them, and he at least ranked Zelensky in third place on that occasion. But I do think that he's worried about the messages that he sends to Vladimir Putin. He's trying to entice him into a serious negotiation. So that might explain what Trump is up to when he's trying to explain exactly what happened yesterday.
So you think it's more about positioning himself for ongoing negotiations, not that negotiations, which he previously contended would take him a day to sort out, aren't necessarily going his way, and he's trying to cast blame to his predecessor.
I think, on the Biden thing, I definitely think he's trying to say, hey, listen, Biden mismanaged this thing all along. He poured gasoline on a raging fire. At least I'm the one that's trying to make peace here.
Okay, and he's not just trying to make peace, he's also trying to reach an economic deal with Ukraine on minerals still,
That's
a draft that obviously has been revised multiple times. Do you think that will be resolved soon? And if it is, what ultimately does that open up?
So I think it helps a little bit because it helps with what Donald Trump is worried about, which is, has the United States been taken advantage of? Have we overpaid for the defense of Ukraine? So I still think it helps Ukraine in the sense that President Trump will be able to say, you know what, we've gotten at least some of our money repaid here. I know Zelensky objects to that because he says that was a grant, and it was. But I think some of this is just the politics of America first here in the United States. And the president, in every relationship from tariffs to Iran, is trying to make sure the United States gets a good deal. So if he feels like we're being repaid a little bit, I'm okay with that.
We heard from President Zelensky. He sat down for an interview with 60 Minutes, which aired last night, in which he invited President Trump, again, to come to Ukraine and see for himself the devastation that has been wrought by this years-long war. Do you think there's any scenario in which President Trump actually makes that trip?
I really don't, unless it was for some crowning achievement at the end of a longer negotiation, and that was part of it all. I don't see it in the cards for right now.
Do you see a deal in the cards for right now, or were we
No.
getting overly optimistic with the speed with which this process could actually work?
So I think we're overly optimistic if we think we're going to get all the way to a peace agreement. So there's a spectrum for me. I think it's more likely you get some sort of ceasefire that maybe is occasionally violated and we muddle through for some period of time. I think that's more likely than a full-scale peace agreement, and that might be good enough for Trump in the end, because look how hard it is even to try and get them to live up to the terms of the very modest ceasefire they have today on energy resources and the Black Sea.
But how do we get to any kind of agreement on any peacekeeping force that would maintain a ceasefire, even if it was just a kind of limited, muddled one?
Yeah, I'm worried about that too. I think we've, of course, rejected that Ukraine would be in NATO. It seems like it's increasingly unlikely that we'll have NATO European allies inside of Ukraine. Where I think and I hope we're going to go in terms of security guarantees is some longer-term commitment, maybe not $60 billion a year, but some sort of commitment to Ukraine that will continue to fund your military at some level, at least up until the point where the Europeans can really step up in a larger way. Now, maybe it's hopeful, but I think at some point we have to acknowledge that Ukraine has real security needs, and we ought to try and meet them.